Today, I believe the date is June 13th, Friday, 2025. I'm going to attempt, anyway, to share my perspective as a baby boomer growing up as an outlaw in my home country. To put a date on it and why I'm saying baby boomer and why I'm saying June 13th of 2025, I am of the second wave of post-World War II babies. The first wave probably were born in February. The war was over in June of 45, and then all these guys came home and they made a bunch of babies. I was conceived in San Francisco probably around the beginning of March. That's 9 months after the end of the war. So I was born 18 months after the Second World War, and this day may be the beginning of the Third World War. I'm not going to go into the details of what's going on today, where it's not I, but others have marked this as the actual beginning of the Third World War. But my life has been framed between two world wars and defined by that period. So why do I say I was born an outlaw? 1947, January 1947, Los Angeles, actually living in Culver City. No, Southgate, the southern entrance to the Los Angeles area. And my father had been a bomber pilot, a B-17 pilot, flew out of England, missions over Germany. I don't know much about my mother's, what she was doing at that time. I actually don't even know the year they were married. I don't think they got married until after, actually. That's one reason why I'm making these autobiographical videos, is so that if my son or anybody else is interested in what it was like for me growing up in this period, they'll have a way to understand that. Born an outlaw. I'm a red diaper baby, meaning, for those of you who don't know that term, I'm the child of members of the Communist Party in the United States. At the time of the Second World War and previous to the Second World War, by many, communism was not really a good thing, but it was not the devil it became by the end of the Second World War. My father was a communist while he was flying bombing missions over Germany. My father was a communist when he came back as an injured pilot to teach other pilots. Maybe that is a Freudian slip. The pilots who have now become pirates, that will become more clear as the story unfolds. He was a Communist Party member then. when he got out of the army and he continued his political activities. My parents met at a communist youth camp when my father, as a student at UCLA, was a counselor, and his younger sister, my Aunt Ida, went to that camp. She was a friend of my mother's, and my mother was invited, and my mother and father got to know each other at the communist youth camp. My father was, till the day he died, a believer in the quote, let me get it right, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. He was a believer in that. He quit being a Communist Party member when the Stalin atrocities became publicly known in the West. There was a mass migration of, this is in Los Angeles, a mass migration of mostly communist Jews, intellectual. They left the Communist Party. My father, not Jewish, English, my mother Jewish. So they were part of that movement. What's it like being a fugitive from the time you were born? To be an enemy of the state from the time you were born. I was born into a foreign country. My parents were hunted, persecuted, prosecuted for their way of thinking. The notion of freedom of thought and freedom of expression never applied to my family. Those ideas are only acceptable within the framework of the status quo. So as a fugitive child, I lived my earliest years. I believe the exodus of my parents from the Communist Party was probably it was certainly in the late 50s. I don't know the date, but I can pinpoint the events of my life because as a political activist, my father was a union organizer. He used the principles that he had been learning through his study of Marxism and applied it to management of people. And the best way of doing that was, at that time, to be a labor union organizer. He worked for Owens, Illinois Glass Company, and he was a forklift driver and president of his union. This whole time, he was a member of the Communist Party. This whole time, he was running from the FBI. We had many houses in the time between the time I was first brought home from Children's Hospital in Los Angeles until we moved into the San Fernando Valley in 1959. Those first 47 to 59, 12 years, I did not know this, was a fugitive from the law. My parents felt like if they were to tell us that we were in this forbidden class of people, then we, the children, would have the burden of having to keep that secret. So they decided not to tell us. I can't argue with that. Other people other people in the Communist Party, and all of our friends were in the Communist Party. And there are children that we grew up with, and those children knew that their parents were communists, and they didn't spread that word around. So there's no reason to assume that we would have. It's just an assumption that my parents used and followed through with. I remember very good times as a child at labor union organization, fundraisers, picket lines, political activities. I was at age that of 5 or 6 years old, and with my twin sister going in a car which had a speaker on top, campaigning for Judge Stanley Moffat. Vote for Judge Stanley Moffat, we would say. We had no idea who he was, but he was the candidate that was being endorsed by my family and their friends. Most likely he was a left-leaning person. As a Jew, culturally I was a Jew. Religiously, I had no religion. I was an anti-religious person. I was educated to be anti-religious, and I took that religion that teaching very serious, and my religion is to be anti-religion. I've been fighting those bastards my whole life. I didn't know. I didn't put the picture together. It's taken me my whole life to put this picture together. But I've been fighting those freaks my whole life. I would stand as a 5th grader or a 4th grader at Christmas time. Oh, come all ye faithful. Jesus, come to me, and oh, little something of Bethlehem. Oh, Jesus, do this and do that. And I would cringe inside. I would just cringe inside. I would look around to see who was watching me cringe inside, because I was being forced to sing these songs which were anti to my way of life. And I couldn't let that be known. And so I had to suffer in silence. And I did. And I did, and I did, and I did. Being a Jew was one thing. But this was South Central Los Angeles, and it wasn't the worst thing to be. There were worse things to be. I don't know what they were. So a childhood filled with secrecy and with mystery and with drama and with intrigue. This is how insane it was. There was a television series. It was called I Led 3 Lives, subtitle, I was a spy for the FBI. And I guess it was a weekly, maybe it was a daily television show that showed the workings of the communist infiltrators to our beautiful society and the great FBI's work to bring them to justice and uphold the American way. And there were episodes where there were secret handshakes and signs that were given from one to another to identify, okay, I touched my eyebrow and then I scratched myself here and tweaked my nose. These were real things. And this really happened. And I'm watching this as a child, not knowing that the target of these FBI agents were my parents. It's insane. Okay, they left. They left the party. My father went back to school. No, that's not true. He went to a technical school and he learned to assemble printed circuit boards as an electronics technician. He got a job, and from that point on, he elevated himself. The company changed, but every time the upper management went into a new business, they always brought my father with them until he rose to the level of vice president in charge of production. My father's concept of how you organize and how you treat working people was the same as a union organizer as it was in an upper management position. And for that reason, the people loved my father and would work hard for him because they were treated with dignity and respect, not false dignity and respect, but from the heart, dignity and respect. That was my father. And he climbed the scale, not the scale, but the evolutionary in the business, up to be vice president. Every time there was a problem in some part of the corporation, which became multinational, he would go to that part. He'd go to Ireland and fix the problems. He would leave, it would fall to pieces, and then he would come back. Oh, we have a problem in Hong Kong. They would send him to Hong Kong. He'd fix it. He'd do business with the Chinese. He came home, and they said, okay, now we want you here. He says, no, thank you, I'm going to retire. And then he retired. But wherever he went, success followed him because he knew how to relate to people. And his special gift, so stated by him, was his ability to get ordinary people to perform in an extraordinary way. And he did that, and no fault. He did not falter in that. In that time period, from the time he started, the company was Telemeter Magnetics, and this group of people from there went to someplace, and then they went to someplace, and then they ended up at a very large corporation called Data Products, where they made both ends of a computer system at the time, the printer and the disk file. They were gigantic. And my father was in charge of getting those things produced. At that time, he was visited. He didn't know that. He did know that. He learned that. But the FBI would come and check with him, not with him, with his boss. His boss's name was Irv Tomash, and he was the president and founder of Data Products, who knew my father's worth. And the FBI pressured him, Irv Tomash, to fire my father because Data Products, had government contracts. And to have a former communist as an employee at an upper management level, they didn't like that. But Irv Tomash said no. And nothing happened. My father stayed there until he had to either stay there or retire. And he chose retirement because he couldn't stand working in the United States. But this is just a little insight into the inner workings of my environment. I absorbed all of this. How did this affect me? I was not good at high school. I was not good at school. I barely made, that's not, I mean, I made it. I think the highest grade before the last year of high school I ever got was a C. I got C's and D's. I knew I wasn't stupid, but I'm what's it called? Dyslexis. And I would turn things around, and we didn't know it, but I had special reading classes and stuff. I was always kind of a little on the outside. And so I didn't like school, and I didn't do well at school. And I don't know why I started to say this, but it had to do with, I think it had to do with my coming of age in 1965. I was 18 years old. I did go to 1 year of the junior college after I had graduated high school because that's what was expected of me. But I hated school, so I didn't go. And I ended up flunking out. And then at 18 years of age, if you weren't in school, you were drafted. So the good old Uncle Tom, not Uncle Tom, maybe so, but Uncle Sam came to my door and picked me up and said, "You're going into the Army." And I said, "Shit." Well, okay. There was nothing in the news. There was not a Vietnam War first page daily news report. You would hear something once in a while, but who paid attention to anything? And my parents did. My father did. This is a very weird story. And so in 1965, I was drafted. 2 years of mandatory service, 3 years if you enlist. And if you enlist, you can enlist into a certain school and get a contract and a guarantee, or you could go in 4 years and you would get 1 year of training in an advanced technological field, and then 2 years in Europe, and the last year at the needs of the Army. That was the best deal for me and Yitzhak. Yitzhak Reitman was my close friend. He also had gotten drafted, so we decided to go in the military together. We went in as missile guidance something electronics that required about a year's worth of training, and then we would go to Europe for 2 years, and that sounded pretty good to us. All that was done, and then the day came, the day before we were supposed to leave. He did, I did not. There was a security form that I had to fill out. And there's the standard question, have you ever been, are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party or affiliated with anyone in the Communist Party in the USA? I took this form home and innocently put no. I'll never forget the look on my dad's face. And he said, "Steve, come here." Took me into the bedroom, sat me down and said, "We can't answer no." And that's when he told me our family history. He told me of his involvement in the Communist Party. Everything that I just relayed is what my father told me at that time. Excuse me. I was not allowed to go in the Army because that discipline, what they call MOS, the job in the military, required a security clearance, a secret security clearance. And with my history, I could not get a secret security clearance. So that was a red thing for me. Isaac Yitzhak left. We were never friends again, unfortunately. he had his own difficulties. Between 1965 and 1967, I had this major conflict with the government. I didn't know. In 1964, I graduated high school, bought myself a motorcycle. This is when the Honda, what they called it, the Honda Sportster? No, a Honda something, I don't know, a Honda 250 or a 305cc motor, and the sports motorcycles just started to become popular, and I was part of that. I caused a lot of difficulties for my parents, a lot of difficulties for my father. I frightened him. He didn't know what to do with me. And so when this army thing, it made a man out of him, maybe it'll be successful with me. So he pursued this legal challenge, which said, I, Stephen Rose, was never a communist. My parents were, and I, Stephen Rose, am not responsible for their anything. So I cannot be judged negatively. That was his point of view, and he fought for it. We fought for 2 years with the government saying, I can't get a security clearance, but I could still be drafted. So I was being punished for my family's beliefs. I was born an outlaw. I was treated as an outlaw. When my family presented themselves in this document, yes, we were communists. Well, they were holding it against me, and I could go into the army and be infantry or artillery or some other sort of, what do they call it? Fodder, cannon fodder for the military, which my father didn't agree with at all, nor my mother, nor anybody in our social group. We were, the worst thing is a liberal. The best thing is a radical. We were radicals. And I forgot where I was in this story. Let me recollect myself. I get lost. Oh, yeah, so my father, he said, that's not fair. You have to judge him for who he is. And we went through court battles. We went through congressional hearings. And at the end, I went through interviews at the Department of the United States in Pasadena, in Los Angeles. There were 3 different interviews I went to where I was led into a room with a two-way or a one-way mirror. They could see me, but I couldn't see them. And they had magazines on their table, and I know they were watching me. And I could tell by the magazines that were put out there which ones they wanted me, which ones they would see, which ones I picked up. And so I picked up nothing. And I did nothing for an hour or 45 minutes until someone would come in, and then they would take an interview with me of some sort. And then, excuse me, these places were scary. They had Marine Guards and flags and pictures of presidents and shit like that. I'm just a guy. I was just born. I was an accident of my father and mother's passion. I didn't ask for any of this bullshit. And there it comes. Calm down, Steve. So obviously it was a difficult time. At the end of those 2 years, I was not granted a a secret security clearance. And I was going to be drafted anyway. So my father's last ditch effort was to write a letter to Senator Thomas Kuchel, one of the California senators, explaining him this situation. And through his personal investigation, I was granted a secret security clearance, and I was guaranteed the right to enlist in the United States Army like any other person. This is insanity, because by this time, Vietnam was very much in the news. The anti-war movement was growing. My family was an anti-war family, and I was fighting for the right to go into the Army. Other people in our social group were fighting to not go into the Army. I was burning flags in parks of protest and waiting to go into the Army. My father was fighting for me. It's so bizarre. It's so crazy making. And it's an answer which I will never have, because I never asked him what was going through his mind, what was his motivation to contradict his own beliefs and sacrifice his own son for the system which he was trying to change and with which he did not agree. That's a mystery in my life that I will never know the answer to. I have come to peace with it because I know my father loved me. I myself then went on to have and raise an extremely difficult boy. And I thought, yeah, I could see how easily you could check out, because the stress of having a difficult child is not really replicable. So when I had my own difficult child, while I didn't agree with my father, I could understand, because I always knew my father loved me and he always cared about me, and this dichotomy between his action and his feelings. I eventually got an answer to that. Unfortunately for myself, or maybe fortunately, there's no such thing as good or bad luck. I did go into the Army. I did have a security clearance, and I did go to Vietnam. And I did come home from Vietnam, and I saw a point of view and experienced a relationship to my own government, which has informed me for the rest of my life. I'm now sitting in Argentina and moved here maybe 7 years ago. We're going on our 8th year of being here. We have a very nice life here. And there's a relief in living in a country that's not a world power. In no way, however, am I divorced from the problems in the US. I'm daily looking at the news. I watch world news, international news, left-wing news, right-wing news, whatever news. I watch the highlights, and then I do my own research to see what in the hell is going on. And I finally figured out that there's no way to know what's going on. Even today, as I am speaking, robots that I saw on the internet, I saw them as prototypes. They're being used by the National Guard for face recognition and reconnaissance, and they also have weapons on them that disperse tear gas. The weapons that I saw before in the prototypes was not limited to tear gas. And so the things that leak out accidentally are now being tried in real life. There's something very ominous and all-encompassing that we're going through, and I don't see how anybody can tell what's really happening. So my perspective, I think, is one that I wanted to express, because I used to, when I got out of the Army, I used to consider myself an observer. I had a sculpture teacher, his name was Robert Bassler, and I was talking to him about it, and he told me how he viewed himself as a participant. I viewed myself as a viewer. I no longer feel a viewer. I now feel myself a participant, and I see the difference. I feel the difference, and I owe that to Tai Chi, which I believe is a good place to end this conversation. It's not really a conversation, it's a presentation. And so I'm going to say ciao.